Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episodes 1 and 2 of Season 2 of The Legend of Korra. So we're covering Rebel Spirit and the Southern Lights. And I gotta say, it is so great to have this show back. And, it really kicks off just right. It immediately brings you back to all that is just really great and cool about this show. We've got a lot of interesting stuff set up. There's a lot of interesting things going on with the characters. There's some really cool themes going on, and it just feels like a wonderful maturation and continuation of Season 1 and the Avatar universe in general. Now, speaking of just kind of in general, the title for this season is Spirit. And of course, this refers to the conflict that is going on with the spirit world, Korra learning to deal with the spirit side of things, of being the Avatar dealing with the spirit world, and of course continuing her struggle with the spiritual side of being the Avatar, which is one of the two areas that Korra has lacked, where Korra was really lacking. Now, last season really kind of saw her making a little progress there, and also conquering one of her main issues of not really being good at airbending. But so while we do have the conflict going on with the spirit world, we also have spirit as in spirituality being what looks like it's shaping up to be the main source of conflict among the humans this time around. So, last time around it was very much, what we saw last season was very much a parallel of a riff on, economic disparity, classism. This is stuff that I talked about quite a bit last time around. And here we're seeing basically, well, from what we see at the end of episode 2, we might be looking at something along the lines of a holy war. And of course, we're also seeing infighting amongst the Water Tribe. This is shaping up to be a serious conflict, not between benders and non-benders, but among, as I said, the Northern and Southern Water Tribe. Now, this is, I think, a really interesting choice to make, because in the first, when we were dealing with Aang, it was mostly a conflict between him and the Fire Nation. Now, the show, of course, went out of its way to show us that not everybody from the Fire Nation was bad. In fact, that most of them were good people who just were for various reasons, going along with an amoral system. Now, here we're really shaping up to see the Water Tribe presented in a negative light. And remember, it ultimately panned out last season that the villains from last time around were both, Tarlok and Amon, were both Water Tribe. So here we're seeing a real flip side of this. And another parallel between what we're seeing here with the Water Tribe and the Fire Nation is Urlaquack. I'm going to need a little Urlaquack. Okay, I'm just going to call him Korra's uncle, because it's going to, I think, take me a little while to nail how to say that guy's name. So anyway, Korra's uncle is in some ways you can see a parallel between him and Firelord Ozai. Ozai saw himself as, all this force and conquest that he was going about doing was ultimately to, in his mind, sort of drag the rest of the world kicking and screaming into industrialization, to modernization. And just to look at Republic City, well, ultimately, in a way, he succeeded there because the world did, industrialize. Now, what we're seeing here is that Korra's uncle is trying to go out there and do essentially the same thing with the spiritual side. Like I said, this is a guy who looks like he might be going out to essentially raise a holy war. But he does have the same thing. I am going to bring you, by force if necessary, to where you need to be. I'm going to bring you to this place of, well, Sozan's thing was more progress. Korra's uncle's thing is more like spiritual purity. So, two completely different people, but a very similar train of thought. And of course, this sets up what like a very fertile ground for some really interesting and very philosophical thoughts. I mean, just like what we were dealing with last time around, we ended up talking about all kinds of things. The 1%, class, socialism, communism. I mean, there's really a lot you can read into this show if you're willing to look. But anyway, let's talk more specifically about some of the things that are going on in the episode, and we'll put the big ideas aside for the moment. One thing we've learned is that the council in Republic City has been disbanded, and that there's now a president in charge of things there. Now, I do hope they elaborate on this, because it is pretty interesting to see how the political situation is in Republic City. But I think that's something that's going to be on the back burner at the moment. Now, one thing I did like, one was when we first check in with Bolin. Did you guys notice that his new teammates were the cosplayers who we saw briefly last season? That was, I have to say, quite a nice touch. And I also really liked how Shiro Shinobi says, it's bending night in Republic City. I'm pretty sure this is probably a shout out to a Canadian show called It's Hockey Night in Canada. From what I understand of Canadian culture, that's something of an institution up there. But I'm not really a hockey fan, so beyond that, I really can't say. But I have the feeling that might have been an intentional nod. Anyway, so speaking of the council, we start things off right away with Korra horribly abusing her power as the Avatar by using the Avatar state. Essentially, as Tenzin describes it, as a booster rocket. Korra, she basically sees the Avatar state as a toy. And, this isn't really surprising. Korra's, 17 years old? Maybe 18 by this point? Now, imagine if you're dealing with a teenage girl about that age, and you've just given her her first car, and it's a freaking Ferrari, or like a NASCAR or something. You really think that she's going to be the most responsible person in the world with this? But the way that Korra is doing this, one, it sort of shows her backsliding a little bit in terms of her character. She's basically considered airbend. Korra was willing to admit last season that she had two problems. She had a little bit of that she had a problem with the spiritual side of things, and that she wasn't that good at airbending. Well, now Korra is at least a capable airbender. But as Tenzin points out, she's not an airbending master. Also, Korra, as made very clear, that she knows jack about the spirituals, like actually dealing with spirits, which is of course part of the Avatar's duty. So, and it looks from what happens this episode, it looks like maybe Tenzin was going to get around to do that taking care of that once he was finished training her in airbending. Obviously he would have learned about this sort of thing from his father. But Korra basically is like, okay, I can airbend now, I can enter the Avatar state at will, I'm golden, I have no more flaws. But of course, this is a perfect sign of Korra's greatest flaw, and that is her own arrogance, her own hubris. Korra thinks that there's very little that anybody has left to teach her. Now, she's not entirely without growth in this aspect, however. Once she sees quite clearly that her uncle has vast knowledge of something that is related to her duty as the Avatar, and that, as I said, something she's pretty much completely ignorant about, she's eager to learn from him. And Korra is, of course, completely right to call out her father and Tenzin and the White Lotus Society for really neglecting this important aspect of her training as the Avatar. And actually, if you stop and think about it, Korra does generally have a pretty good reason to be mad about a lot of her circumstances there. Her life has essentially really been controlled by the White Lotus Society since she was, barely more than a toddler. And they all did this, of course, with the best of intentions, but Korra does also raise the point that she should have the right to choose who her teachers are. And this is something that we've seen. We saw Kuryu going around the world finding people. We saw Roku going around the world trying to find people. Aang, one of the things he did, especially a big part of his deal in Season 3 was trying to find a firebending teacher. I mean, he tried it with Zhong, and that didn't go so well because of Aang's own arrogance, interestingly. And also, if you're going to look back at that, remember that it was sort of visions and the spiritual side of him that led Aang to Toph, who was, of course, became his earthbending master. So Korra has pretty good reason to be upset about this. By not really even giving her the basics on this, they have possibly seriously hampered her growth as the Avatar, and possibly even, endangered her ability to really become the best Avatar that she could be. But that said, Tenzin also really does have a great point. As I've said, he points out to Korra that she's still not mastered airbending. And of course, Korra, pretty much blows him off on that one. Now, this is kind of a flaw on Tenzin's part, is that he's really, I don't think, still hasn't quite gotten a good grasp on what works with Korra. If Tenzin had basically said, "Oh, you think that you've mastered airbending? Well, let's go over to the practice area. You promise not to use earthbending, firebending, or waterbending, or the Avatar state, and we'll have ourselves a bending battle, and we'll see who's the airbending master around here." Now, Korra is, of course, a rather competitive person, so of course there's no way in the world she's going to turn that down. And Tenzin, being the only person walking around with those airbending tattoos, is probably would have taken her to school. And that would have gotten through to Korra. That I have absolutely no doubt. It's sort of that's famous saying about the cowboy who smacks a mule in his head in the head with a board and says, well, first you have to get their attention. Yeah, Korra's a little bit like that. Tenzin even refers to her fighting style as Korra style in terms of airbending. And she's reasonably good at that, but Korra style is not airbending master style, and Korra has not come anywhere close to realizing that yet. Now let me see here. Oh yeah, and another thing in regards to Korra's hubris is how she talks about how I stopped Amon. Okay, Korra, let's look at how you stopped Amon. You stopped Amon after he'd basically brought the city to its knees. You had a whole bunch of help, and it was basically him getting knocked into the water and his makeup getting washed off that really sank the whole thing that he did. And oh yeah, this was after you got captured by his brother. Yeah, Korra, you did some pretty kick-ass stuff there, but let's not pretend that you didn't come this close to maybe letting everything go completely to hell. But I guess Korra is not one to pass on a technical victory. So yeah, and also you didn't really stop Amon so much as you made Amon run away, and then his brother kind of did a murder-suicide with him. If Amon had come back for round 2, sure, he wouldn't have had the Equalists backing him up, but he could still do stuff with waterbending that you have no clue how to counter. So, yeah. Okay, well, anyway, going on. Let me see here. And getting back into some of the big ideas. One of the big ideas that we have going on all the time in Avatar is the danger of when things are unbalanced. When we're dealing with Aang, we're dealing with the elements being unbalanced. First season of Korra is the divisions of society being unbalanced. And now we're dealing with spiritual imbalance in terms of both the relationship between humans in the spirit world and, of course, the balance of spirituality within the northern and southern water tribes. So, talking about that more, we also get well, basically, we really kind of are very solidly introduced to Korra's dad as a character. And apparently he seems to have a new voice actor from what I've read. And it's interesting that he seems at this point very protective of Korra, but when we see him briefly last season, he was sort of like, yeah, okay, cool, take my daughter off and train her to be the Avatar. Then again, after everything that's gone down in Republic City 6 months before, it's probably not that surprising that he would take a rather serious step back and look at how his role as Korra's father. And of course, obviously he has good reason to have been worried about Korra's safety, so you can't really blame the guy for wanting to step in and be more of a dad and protect his daughter. Now, during all of this, everybody ultimately ends up going off into the Everstorm to deal with this. And one thing that I noticed there is that there we're dealing with 3 sets of siblings. And, of course, we're dealing with, the creepy twins, Mako and Bolin, and Korra's dad and Korra's uncle, whose names, again, I still have not quite got down, but I'll try to get them down by next episode. Anyway, now this also, if you look at these guys, presents a very interesting look at balance and out of balance. Now let's with Mako and Bolin having the good, reasonable sibling relationship, and then you've got Korra's 2 weirdo cousins who are kind of a creepy hive mindish almost. That's taking sibling closeness to an extreme, and of course the girl Eska is played by Aubrey Plaza, who I guess most folks are probably going to know from the show Parks and Recreation. I've never seen that one, but I've heard great things about it. I just tend to always think of her as Julie Power from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but I'm a big Scott Pilgrim fan, so... And then, of course, you have Korra's father and uncle, who are the polar opposite. These are the siblings who are very, very, very far apart. I mean, these guys are just totally opposed to each other in pretty much every way. And another thing that I really like when we're seeing all of this go down is that you can very clearly tell who is Northern Water Tribe and who is Southern Water Tribe. The clothes that they wear, obviously they're both blue, but they have a very distinctively different styles. And I think that's very telling. It really shows that while these people might share a common origin, there are some very serious cultural divides between them. And of course, the main thing that we're dealing here with is, of course, the spiritual divide. Now, when we learn about Korra's dad's past, I have to say I find it a little strange that Korra was completely in the dark about this. Because, well, they're in a time that's equivalent to roughly the 1920s. And we've seen that paparazzi exist. So, we've seen that mass media exists. So, obviously the Avatar is big news. How come there wasn't some reporter when she first set foot in Republic City screaming in her face, so what do you think about your dad being exiled from the Northern Water Tribe? I can only assume that his exile was either explained away, in order to save face for the royal family, or it was just, said that he left willingly or something. Because nothing else really makes sense. But again, this isn't really an important detail. It's just one of those things that makes you really go, wait a minute. Now, another thing that I'd like to talk about is the relationship between Korra and Mako. And I really do like how they're handling them now that they're an established relationship. We see them having these cutesy moments, we see them having affectionate moments, but we also see conflict between them. Korra gets mad at Mako when he basically says to her, you should just do what you think is right. And, that's a pretty silly thing for her to get mad at him about, because everything that's going on here, in terms of spiritual, dealing with the spirit world and all this other Bender stuff, is this Avatar stuff, I should say. Obviously, Mako's a Bender. This is just totally above Mako's head. All he really can do is exactly what he does in this episode. He is be supportive, and even flat out says, I will support whatever it is that you decide to do. So Korra getting mad at Mako for not advising her on something that he is just simply not qualified to give her advice on, that's pretty BS. On the other hand, they do seem to they do seem to make up over it, and I kind of like how Mako even subtly points this out to her. It just shows that this does feel like a real relationship, because while real relationships, of course, have those caring and affectionate moments, it doesn't mean that you're never going to have conflict with your significant other. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Not a huge amount to say about what's going on with Bolin. His relationship with Eska, I mean, it certainly is amusing. Bolin is really, like, as I've said, he's the Sokka of this series. He's the go-to guy for comic relief, and with all the heavy stuff going on in this episode, that was certainly needed. And I'm definitely getting a kick out of this relationship. Although, wow, Bolin, if you're going for that girl, you're maybe a little bit on the desperate side for a girlfriend. But I have a feeling that there's going to be quite a significant source of humor to be mined from that. Not a huge amount to say about Asami. Her role here, it's really just kind of a setup for obviously what's going to be going on with her. But it does speak well of her character that despite all the odds, despite everything that she's dealing with, that she's not giving up. She's trying to resurrect her family's business and just trying to go on with her life. And let me see here. I don't really have too awful much to say about what's going on with Tenzin's family. I mean, it's certainly nice to sort of really see Kaya and Bumi starting to get fleshed out. We of course get to see more of Katara, which is really cool. And it looks like they're setting up some stuff with letting Jinora have some serious screen time. I've followed the show's Facebook page, so I have a pretty good idea who that statue is of, and what the ramifications are going to probably be later on down the road for that. But that's all for another time. I guess now would be a good time for everybody to say to everybody, in the comments, please don't post spoilers. I don't know exactly what's floating around out there. I'm not a spoilers person. I try to avoid them, but I really don't want anybody getting spoiled in the comments. And please don't send me spoilers in personal messages. That's kind of rude, dudes. So anyway, I think that's everything that I have for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. So until next time, take care and have a good one.